bettingangle.us, a free site. It's December 27th. I'm on the road, don't have my regular gear, so we're giving this a go. Let me know in the comment section if you can't hear the audio, okay? Football. We're just going to throw out some thoughts. Thought they needed to be heard. You got a situation right now in Baltimore, right? It's being covered up a little bit. Understand who Lamar Jackson is. Last year, when Josh Allen won the MVP, Jackson, who already has won 2 MVPs, had better numbers, right? And so just understand, you're talking about a guy who was an elite quarterback coming into this year. If you look at Baltimore's numbers, as good as Huntley has been and as good as the coaching staff has been, when Jackson plays, the team has a much higher winning percentage. Understand, too, Jackson is such an outlier that when the Ravens play teams from the other conference, the NFC, Jackson has one of the best records in all of football against the NFC. So you're talking about an elite quarterback. But let's talk about life. When you're at your best, when you're conquering projects, 20% of the people still hate you, right? In other words, it'll look like a consensus. People say, oh, you're doing a great job. You know, I have no doubt right now, 20% of the people at least hate Pat Mahomes. 20% of the people at least hate Sean McVay. 20% of the people at least hate Matt Stafford, right? And so just understand, now we're hearing from the 20% in Baltimore. I don't believe John Harbaugh, the head coach, is in the 20%. He describes his relationship with Lamar Jackson as A+. But I want people to go online and listen to the videos that have been made in the last week, right? Jackson hurt his back in a key game, had to be taken out. Understand that Jackson is like one of these track and field guys who, you know, if they hurt a calf, if they have an ankle that's not right, they understand they can't race. Right now, this is different than the hockey mentality where you get a tooth knocked out, you're back in the game. In football, we just saw a game where Justin Herbert breaks his hand, right? Broken bone. Gets a pseudo cast, is back in the same game, right? That's not Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is a slender guy. He's an athlete, right? When he has a pain, and if you're a quarterback, if you're having back spasms, folks, you're not going to be able to throw the ball, right? So he left the game, and now you have videos that I'm going to call coordinated. In other words, someone somewhere, maybe in the building in Baltimore, maybe from a competitor someplace, has decided to leak stories of Jackson falling asleep at team meetings. Right, folks? This is coordinated. Now, why does it matter? It matters because DK Metcalf of the Steelers got himself suspended for the last 2 games of the year. Right? If Baltimore finds a way to win this weekend, just understand, if the Steelers lose to the Cleveland Browns, and according to some, the wise guy side of the play are the Browns, right, with the points, then you're going to have the division, the AFC North, up for grabs the last week of the season. If the Steelers lose, Ravens win this week, then the last week you have Baltimore against Pittsburgh for the whole thing, right? Just understand that right now, at the most inopportune time of the year, stories are circulating that a guy with better numbers than the reigning MVP last season is somehow out of favor with some portion of the public or the team in Baltimore, right? Pay attention to that. Let's talk about some other things that caught my eye this season. We're being touchy-feely here, right? San Francisco. Folks, Mac Jones is the backup. Now, truth be told, from this seat, he's not as talented as Brock Purdy, right? But Mac Jones brings with him with a skill set that doesn't include a gun for an arm, right? Mac Jones is a gamer, but he's not a great athlete. But he brings with him leadership skills, right? The kind of leadership skills that enables you to beat Seattle in Seattle. I know hardcore gamblers know Seattle might actually be better on the road. But understand, with Mac Jones, the 49ers beat Seattle in Seattle, right? With Mac Jones, the 49ers beat the Rams. So I'll just say, it's interesting that Kyle Shanahan, who as head coach of the Niners, has led the Niners to multiple Super Bowl appearances. It's interesting that Shanahan, who, according to Bay Area media, wanted to pick Mac Jones the year that the Niners passed on him for the guy who's now playing backup for the LA Chargers, right? Just understand that Shanahan thought enough of Mac Jones to go out and grab one of Mac Jones's former teammates who was his favorite receiver. Right, folks? That's real love. I mean, what team is getting personnel to fit in with the backup quarterback when you have a, starter who you just gave a big contract to? Right? Brock Purdy's making over $50 million a year, folks. By the way, I think the Niners got a bargain on that deal. Right? Well, just understand, Mac Jones is highly thought of in San Francisco. I think you need to look at backup quarterbacks carefully, right? Some of the backup quarterbacks in this league have assured themselves of jobs next year if they want them, right? Who's been the better quarterback this year in Washington? Has it been Jaden Daniels, or has it been Marcus Mariota? Right? Let me say, in Arizona, folks, you're kidding yourself if you think Kyler Murray is going to be there next year. Jacoby Brissett came in and is averaging around 300 yards per game. Let's talk about another unique scene. Now, I'm one of those who actually likes Dylan Gabriel. Right? Gabriel was big man on campus in college. Gabriel in the pros doesn't have bad numbers. Right? The Cleveland offense, quite frankly, not that gifted. Right? But let me say, Gabriel is really more of a short yardage passer. They brought in Shedeur Sanders. Folks, suddenly Cleveland was throwing the ball deep. Right? Is that how it looked to you? I'm not saying I'm penciling in Shedeur Sanders for the Pro Bowl. But what I am saying is Shedeur Sanders has shown enough right now where Cleveland can't let him leave the building. Right? This is a guy who not only was throwing the ball deep, and you understood, this was a rookie. You understood. He got no playing time really the first half of the year. But if you looked at that Cleveland team, folks, they rallied around him. Shedeur Sanders has leadership skills, and unlike a lot of these esteemed quarterbacks who enter the league as rookies, when Shedeur Sanders got to Colorado, they were a dumpster fire. Shedeur Sanders' offensive line at Colorado was never that great. So you're talking about that unique, college quarterback who lived a life that was different than J.J. McCarthy at Michigan, right? So to me, if I'm Cleveland, and understand, Cleveland, high pick, they're thinking about what they want to do in the draft, right? You got some quarterbacks out there. I'm not saying it's a great class, but Cleveland has a high pick to play with if they want to get back in the quarterback game. Whatever move they make, whatever ring they get on the phone from other teams, I don't believe you can let Shedeur Sanders leave the building, right? I think this is the quarterback who's uniquely made for the Browns, right? Shedeur Sanders would fit in seamlessly with the Los Angeles Chargers. This is that rare young quarterback who does not need an offensive line, who knows how to slide just enough in the pocket. He's not a great athlete. He's not his dad. Rather, this is a different type of athlete. He's the pocket passer. He would fit in with the Detroit Lions. If I were one of these other GMs, I would think, okay, gee, what round did Cleveland get Shedeur Sanders in? What was that, fourth round or later? Hell, I'll part with a second round pick. I'll give them a profit. If I'm Cleveland, I'd say, nah, player, that's not enough. Not only that, we're not in the trade game. Let me say, too, these rookie quarterbacks are underpaid, right? I know that sounds ridiculous. Some 22-year-old is getting millions of dollars. They're underpaid because the going rate for a veteran quarterback's over $40 million a year, right? Let me say, too, Indianapolis, right? The fact that they made trades to get Sauce Gardner, right? The fact that they thought that they were ready to compete this year. And, of course, they have an offensively minded head coach. Tells me that they found their guy, right? Now, he, of course, is out. He just had surgery. Folks, Daniel Jones is the future in Indianapolis. Don't get me wrong. Phillip Rivers is always a phone call away, right? But Daniel Jones is the guy in Indianapolis. And if I'm, Daniel Jones, I realize I was in the building for 5 minutes. This fan base was so starved that they came up with a nickname for me in the 5 minutes I was in the building, right? They started calling him Indiana Jones. In other words, the fan base identified with him. The fan base started saying, hey, you're one of us, right? I think athletes need to realize that there are times in life where you don't get to pick the crowd, where the crowd picks you. And as long as Jonathan Taylor's in that backfield, and given that I'm now in a talent-heavy division, folks, two of the best teams in the AFC are in the AFC South. If I'm Indianapolis, I look around, I say, wow, this is a juggernaut division. I believe when there are good teams in your division, it actually helps you raise your game. That's why the teams from the NFC West are so dangerous right now. If I'm Indianapolis, I'm patient. If I'm Daniel Jones, I go nowhere. I'm not threatened by 44-year-old Phillip Rivers, right? In fact, I'm impressed that the team's going to do whatever it takes to win, whether or not that's, conventional wisdom, right? Let me make a few other points here. Jacoby Brissett, right? Folks, Arizona has a quarterback. I've looked at the guys in college, right? Mendoza impressed me by chance. I was watching the game where Mendoza hit a guy in the back of the end zone. Now, it's debatable to me whether the guy got both feet in, right? And I was impressed by Mendoza because Mendoza has some Joe Montana in him. In other words, it looks like he's throwing to wide open receivers. In other words, the guy processes that fast. But people need to understand that Mendoza, the Heisman Trophy winner, is not John Elway. Right, folks? He's not Jeff George. In other words, this is not the guy with the gun who day one defenses have to respect because the guy can make every throw. Right? Mendoza is more like Shedeur Sanders. Right, folks? Shedeur Sanders just went in like the fourth round. Let's just be real. Also, when they went to a backup in Cleveland, it wasn't Shedeur Sanders. right? Let's talk about the Raiders. I'm a little bit surprised. Maybe the public here can help me. They told Max Crosby, hey, player, you know, they didn't use the word tank, I'm sure, but they said, hey, we want you to rest. And these Pro Bowler guys, they don't want to rest, right? It's the warrior spirit. Folks don't understand. If you can stand up and walk, these players want to be in the game, right? Whether or not they're banged up, whether or not the team only has a couple of wins, right? So it sounds to me like the Raiders are tanking. I'd like to know who they're tanking for, right? I know this sounds ridiculous. I know the numbers aren't there this year. Geno Smith is actually an above average quarterback. Look at his numbers from last year, right? Genty is a gamer. Let's just say Genty didn't have an offensive line. And, Genty was the wrong pick where the Raiders picked him. Right now, I'm a running back guy. I remember the days when you knew, an Eric Dickerson was going to get the ball 25 times, right? I remember the days where there was one running back, right? O.J. Simpson, Walter Payton. There wasn't this tandem running back situation that you have on teams like the Chiefs, right? But in today's NFL, Genty, look at the yards per carry, right? He's not Billy Sims, right? This isn't the rookie who you understand is operating at a Pro Bowl level. So to me, if I have a top 10 pick, I can't pick him. Let's go one step further too. While Mendoza does at times remind me of Joe Montana, and Montana for me is one of those holy grail quarterbacks. Understand, Montana was not a first-round pick. He was not a second-round pick. Folks, Montana, I believe, goes in the third round, and at the time, he was playing for one of those holy grail schools, Notre Dame. It wasn't like the scouts didn't know who Montana was. So if teams are tanking, I'd like to know, who are they tanking for? Right? I don't see the player in college this year who looks like Reggie White, who looks like Lawrence Taylor, who looks like Myles Garrett, right? I don't see the John Elway in this year's class. I don't see the Deion Sanders in this year's class, right? Tell me if you do, and tell me who it is. Right? Finally, let me say this. All eyes should be on the Steelers. Tomlin, of course, already has guaranteed an above 500 season. And Cleveland, not just because Myles Garrett has a shot to break the record, the sack record against the Steelers, but also because if Aaron Rodgers, in his 40s, in his 1 year in Pittsburgh, delivers a divisional title, right? Mike Tomlin, who somehow was above 500 with Duck Hodges, is not going to allow Rodgers to leave the building. Let me say, too, I know Rodgers is viewed as a flaky guy from California and stuff like that. He has to realize that he's playing in front of one of the NFL's best fan bases on one of the NFL's iconic teams, right? And so if I'm Aaron Rodgers, right, and keep in mind, Rodgers has his own career goals, how could I leave a division-winning Pittsburgh Steelers team, right? Also, T.J. Watt is supposed to be back. I get the feeling that whenever you're playing Cleveland and you're a professional, you're a craftsman, and you're playing opposite Myles Garrett, I think that lifts, Pro Bowl level defensive players, right? You want to match the, other talented guy at your position playing in the game. So that game is crucial. Understand the league acted quickly. That appeal did not buy DK Metcalf any time whatsoever, right? If the team loses here and the line is low, right, it's a field goal or so. If the team loses here, they'll be on the verge of giving away a division that they should have sewn up, right? Let me say this about Tomlin, too. You heard what I said earlier. 20% of the people always hate you, right? Whatever you do, you always have a boo section, right? Tomlin, as successful as he has been, has a boo section, right? Even Ben Roethlisberger has come out. I know the Steelers are saying, gee, we haven't won a playoff game since something like 2018 or so, right? I'm just telling you, you got a lot of teams in this league who are thinking, man, you're making the playoffs so often. We've hardly been to the playoffs since 2018. Well, just understand, Tomlin has a boo section. If this situation in Pittsburgh turns into tumbling dominoes, right? Anything can happen, right? You know, some major Steelers, Bradshaw, Roethlisberger, right, are a little upset with the fact that the Steelers' level of accomplishment has been capped in recent years, right? And no one's thinking about the fact that, you know, Tomlin had Duck Hodges, right? That Tomlin last year makes the playoffs, really, you know, with a rotating quarterback. Let's remember, Justin Fields started multiple games for the Steelers last year. That's how thin it was. And the game they lost at the end of the season, that was a close game. Who knows what would have happened if the tight end had held on to the football, right? So those are my thoughts on the road this December 27th. Let me know how this video turns out. Usually I tape a video. I don't just start talking on a live video on my backup to my backup, right? Let me know how this video turned out, and also feel free to comment fully on the content, right? Lamar Jackson, what would you do if you're Baltimore? This is a slender quarterback. Father Time catches up to all of us. He might no longer run as fast as he used to. He had knee problems in the past. Now he's leaving games with a back problem. His playoff record mirrors Justin Herbert. Charger fans need to think about that, right? You don't want to deal with Houston in the playoffs again, right? Particularly with that offensive line, right? Let's just say Lamar Jackson has his detractors in this NFL. Understand, players are forcing the issue, right? They're saying, look, I want 9 figures guaranteed. You know, I want my starting salary to be 50, 55 million, $60 million, right? They're not willing to take it year to year. I'm shocked at the deal that Aaron Rodgers agreed to with the Steelers, right? So let me know if you think Lamar Jackson is the kind of guy who's going to play ball with the Ravens. Let us know if you think he should play ball with the Ravens, right? By ball, he signed for this year, he signed for next year, but you know, a lot of these contracts are fictitious in the NFL, right? You know, let us know if you think he should renegotiate the contract, free up some salary cap. Derrick Henry certainly looks like he's lost a step to me, just keeping it 100. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.